This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Turkey. I'm your host, Ahval editor David Lepeska, and with me today is returning guest and friend of the show, Dimitar Bechev, an Ahval contributor and a research fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thanks for joining us, Dimitar. Hello.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome. We are talking on Monday, August 24th, a few days after Turkish President Erdogan announced a major gas discovery in the Black Sea. It's estimated at about 320 billion cubic meters. It's the largest energy find ever for Turkey, which has long been heavily reliant on foreign sources of energy, particularly Russia and more recently Azerbaijan. It's among the world's 25 largest maritime hydrocarbon discoveries and is classified as a giant discovery, which means it's less than supergiant or the largest mega giant. Israel's Leviathan field is of around 450 billion cubic meters, while Egypt's Zohr field is estimated at about 850 billion cubic meters. So Turkey's find is not massive, but it is sizable, Dimitar. How meaningful do you think this find is? Is it a game changer that will make Turkey an energy exporter in the years ahead?
I won't jump to any conclusions because we have to see the fine print. As with many of other such finds, what really depends is the cost of extracting and marketing the gas. And there is no clear estimate. So before we actually draw any general conclusion about...
and that, just to be clear, that kind of depends on how deep it is and how hard it is to access.
Exactly. There's the geological aspect. And also there is the economic aspect. Will the gas be competitive relative to other suppliers? Because what we have now on the global market is a glut. And that's coupled with relatively low hydrocarbon prices because for the most part, the price of natural gas is indexed to oil. And as we have seen earlier this year, partly as a consequence of COVID-19, there's been a slump of oil prices. So I'm not really sure that the economics right now add up. But before we actually come to any final verdict on the find, we have to see the estimates, and we have to have not politicians or foreign policy experts picking out, but also people from the sector and economists chipping in the conversation.
So you wouldn't even go so far as to say that it's a significant find for Turkey?
It might be a significant find, but the cost of getting it into the Turkish grid or exporting it might be not very amenable to make it worthwhile, to make it economical. I mean, again, as with many of those energy news, you have to be cautious and plug in a lot of experts, including from energy folks, to pass their judgment.
So it could well be an important find. We just really don't know yet.
Exactly. I think that's safe to say it's an important find, but how important it is, time will tell.
Okay, I just want to take a kind of a closer look at how energy has been playing a key role in Turkey's regional policies and posturing. For the past couple of years, Turkey has been hugely aggressive in the Eastern Mediterranean race for hydrocarbon resources, challenging the ships of Greece and France, as well as an Italian commercial vessel, and drilling repeatedly in areas claimed by Cyprus, upsetting Athens and Nicosia and Brussels. Many observers believe the main reason Turkey doubled down on its Libya intervention early this year was to defend and support its maritime borders deal with the Tripoli-based Government of National Accord, or GNA. If the GNA were to fall, Turkey would likely lose some negotiating leverage in the Eastern Mediterranean. And then in Syria, Turkey has refrained from going head-to-head with Russian-backed forces of President Assad, in large part because Turkey relies on Russian energy, as I said before, not to mention Russian tourist dollars. And the same could be said of Libya, where a ceasefire was put in place over the weekend and where Turkey and Russia have been backing opposing sides. Now, suddenly, Turkey makes this sizable and unchallenged discovery in the Black Sea. I wonder, Dimitar, how do you think this will impact Ankara's policies and position in the Eastern Mediterranean? Is it more likely to curb Turkish aggressions because they have this find elsewhere, or spur them on in the hopes of more?
I think right now, in the short term, it will have a neutral impact. It won't change significantly Turkey's behavior. But in the future, should Turkey decide to back up and head back to the negotiations table, I think the find allows some wiggle room for Erdogan, a face saver, if you will. But we are not there quite yet. I think what the real impact of the find is vis-a-vis Russia, because Turkey is about to renegotiate the bulk of its long-term contracts. And by Turkey, I mean the state-owned gas company, BOTAŞ. So they'll be going back to Gazprom because those contracts are expiring, and trying to renegotiate the future relationship, the future commercial deals they'll have with the Russians. And there are a lot of points of contention. Obviously, the price, but also the take or pay clause, which obliges Turkey to pay for a certain percentage of the gas contracted, irrespective of its consumption. With this find, Turkey will have an extra bargaining chip vis-a-vis the Russians, but also other suppliers, including Azerbaijan, Iran, and Qatar, renegotiating those deals. So before we get into the geopolitics of it, I think the commercial aspects and the foreign economic diplomacy aspects are something to consider. And that's why it is a piece of good news for Turkey.
Speaking of the geopolitical aspects, Greece and Egypt are expected to finalize their own maritime borders agreement this week, a deal that Turkey has, of course, denounced as null and void. I wonder how you see that deal influencing the situation. Is it going to exacerbate tensions or maybe bring us closer to negotiations?
Well, Greece is upping the ante because just before they inked the deal, there was a round of exploratory talks between Turkey and Greece. After they signed with Egypt, it's now about to be finalized on Wednesday, of course. But after they signed, Turkey went back to a more assertive posture in the Eastern Mediterranean. My take on this behavior on both Ankara's and Athens' side is that they are kind of building up pressure with a view of maybe re-engaging at a future point. But each side wants to negotiate from a position of strength. And nobody wants to be the first to make a U-turn and sue for negotiations, which makes the situation volatile because if your plan A is to bargain and engage in diplomacy, but that's not possible because you don't want to lose face, you might as well end up with a nasty incident of the kind we saw a couple of days ago when the Greek ship Lemnos collided with a Turkish frigate. And without a third party keeping the Greeks and the Turks apart from each other, which was the case in the 1990s during the Emir Kardak incident, the US being the mediator. Without such a mediator, the situation might become volatile, and without wanting either Greece or Turkey can go over the brink. So this is the worst case scenario we might see. Hopefully it will be a stalemate, and hopefully there will be a diplomatic resolution down the line. But right now we are not quite there.
Yeah, The Economist ran a piece on a possible East Mediterranean conflict on Friday, a few days ago. They wrote, quote, "Neither Greece nor Turkey can afford these rising tensions in the Mediterranean. Both depend on their coastlines for billions of dollars from tourism. The few foreigners considering a trip to a Turkish or Greek resort later this year may be willing to risk COVID-19, but not war." This made me wonder two things. First of all, which of these two struggling economies needs the tourist revenue more? And secondly, are there really tourists canceling trips to Greek and Turkish beaches right now because of these tensions?
I think it's a long shot. I mean, Greece has a long coastal line, lots of islands. We haven't seen any indication that And of course, it's not a year that indicates anything because of the lockdowns and COVID-19 impact. So whatever evidence we have from 2020 is not good to, again, pass any general judgment on the situation. I think when it comes to high politics and security, both sides are willing to forego that. Because again, it's not something we have not seen in the past. There's this whiff, those people who had been around in the 1990s. I mean, I was an undergraduate student reading up on Greek-Turkish relations, but what we see right now looks oddly familiar, even if some of the players have changed and the alliances have reconfigured. But the Greek-Turkish tensions in the Aegean were there, and as they were, by the way, in 1987, when first such incident with Turkish exploration in disputed continental shelf brought up tensions and eventually some sort of a diplomatic negotiation. So there have been cycles in the past, irrespective of tourism and commercial considerations.
You mentioned earlier Russia and Turkey energy trade. On yesterday, those two countries agreed to a deal for a second batch of S-400 missile defense systems after the delivery of the first batch to Turkey last year. The Trump administration has yet to sanction Turkey for its S-400 purchase, despite being compelled to do so by U.S. law and by a recent U.S. House vote. One reason the White House has held off, many believe, is that Ankara has yet to activate any of the S-400s, and it's credited that delay to the coronavirus. I wonder how might this second batch deal change the calculations for Trump in the U.S., if at all?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's the system of decision-making in Washington, D.C. is as dysfunctional as it has ever been. It all comes down to whatever Trump decides. Turkey's bet, Erdogan's bet, is that he can get away with murder virtually by just talking to the White House. And I must say, this far it has worked his way. There is no reason to expect that this time around he'll overplay his card and overplay his hand, and ultimately there will be a pushback. With the election cycle building up now, maybe Turkey has a window of opportunity to go under the radar. And if Trump administration is put on the spot over being too lenient vis-a-vis Turkey, it has a story to tell over partial sanctions. Of course, the legislation you referred to has not been implemented to its full scope. There hasn't been real sanctions when it comes to S-400. As, by the way, the European Union hasn't gone full mile on its sanctions, despite pressure from Greece and Cyprus. But then again, Turkey has suffered some consequences being expelled from the F-35 deal, the military defense cooperation, defense industrial cooperation being downgraded. So at least I think parts of the Trump administration will try to frame it as a robust response that Turkey hasn't gotten away with it.
I mentioned earlier the ceasefire in Libya between the GNA and the forces of Khalifa Haftar, who controls the eastern part of the country and is backed by Russia, the UAE, Egypt, and France. The last time we spoke back in January, the Libyan foes were in Moscow to sign that ceasefire deal when Haftar backed out at the last minute, leading to the largely failed talks in Berlin. This time, both sides have agreed to the ceasefire, but I saw already yesterday Haftar's side claiming that Turkish ships were amassing off the coast near Sirte, suggesting a possible looming battle for that key port. Do you see the ceasefire holding in Libya and possibly leading to some resolution?
I don't know. I mean, you have to talk to people who really know the situation on the ground. My reading of Turkish position is they've been piling up pressure on Sirte and also on the Jufra air base further south in order to secure some sort of a political deal down the road with Benghazi. And by Benghazi, I don't necessarily mean Haftar, but the speaker of the Benghazi-based parliament, Akil Saleh, has been lately trying to carve out a niche for himself and distance his position from that of the Libyan National Army. But absent a positive response on the other side, because, of course, it's a coalition of local players, but also the international backers, Turkey will continue to ramp up pressure. I'm not sure if they are ready to cross that red line and actually mount an assault on Syria in order to boost their political leverage, because it seems to me that the Russians have drawn some red lines by deploying strategic assets in this area. And as ever, Erdogan's calculus, I think there's echoes from Syria here, is to work with the adversary side, having Putin as a go-between. Of course, Russia is in a very different position in the sense that it's much more powerful in Syria than it is in Libya. But hopefully, at least that's Ankara's thinking, the Russians can rally the other side, talk to Saleh, Akil Saleh in Benghazi, and try to work out some compromise. I don't know whether the deal will hold. Certainly, Europeans probably wanted to hold. Now Macron is engaging with the GNA, having invited Sarraj in Paris. But there are surely spoilers as well that might want to see it fail. And there, as in January when we last spoke, there's so many moving parts in Libya. It's hard to pass a definitive judgment on the situation and how it play out.
Right. It seems to me that the UAE and France, if not Russia as well, are still willing to show support of Haftar, or at least stand against Turkey, which means that they may well be willing to provide more material support to Haftar's side and keep the conflict going. I wonder what you think. Has Benghazi, whether it's Haftar or Saleh, accepted that the war is essentially over, that they're unlikely to gain any more leverage?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. It's not just the Russians backing up Haftar. It's also the Emiratis. We've seen this attack in July on the Watia air base, Turkey, and its drone fleet suffered some damage. And now, as we speak, of course, the UAE is conducting a unprecedented exercise, Air Force exercise around Crete with the Greeks. So there's pushback, which also relates has implications for Libya. Again, this is all connected. At least the Mediterranean, the Cyprus issue, and Libya have come together in an interesting way. But again, France is in a somewhat different position, because even if it's pushing back, Turkey is standing behind Greece for a number of reasons of its own. Not just because of antipathy to Turkey and Erdogan personally, but also paying tribute to Macron's vision of Europe as a strategic power. So the stakes from Paris's perspective are not just about French commercial or strategic interests, but also about Europe as a whole. But then again, there is willingness of France to engage with Tripoli as well and to maybe mediate. Which has been also Russia's position over a long period of time. People have focused on Putin's support for Haftar, but there are other Kremlin-related actors who have been involved with not just other factions in Benghazi, but also with the GNA in Tripoli. So both Russia, but also now we see France hedging their bets and trying to capitalize and find the maneuver themselves in a more in a better position in this complex conflict.
Some analysts are now saying that the likeliest outcome in Libya is partition, with a Turkey-backed, partially Islamist GNA in the west and a UAE, Egypt-backed Haftar or Saleh-led government in the east. Let's set aside all these issues you've just gone over. Let's say that does happen. Do you see that working as a possible long-term solution for Libya?
Well, I guess so. Again, we have to give it to Libyan experts, and I'm certainly not one to say how sustainable it is. It's not unprecedented historically, and given all the differences between those two parts. And there is a third part, the Fezzan, in the south, of course. And we have that situation de facto right now. That won't be necessarily good news for Turkey because ultimately what is at play is access to Libya's oil resources. I think Turks want to recoup some of the investment they lost and the projects they squandered in 2011 as a result of the French and the British-led intervention. And that can be done only through a settlement of sorts, which would allow trade to resume and would probably give access to, if not Turkish diplomacy, at least Turkish companies to some of the oil, which is again in the east. Which brings us back to Syria, because Syria plays a role in this export route, despite Tobruk being the main export terminal. Might give some incentives for Turkey faced with a scenario of partitioning. It's the most viable, suboptimal, but likeliest outcome of the conflict. If Syria is on the west side, that might be an outcome Turkey will settle for, despite the risks involved in a push against and a full-blown attempt to gain and to conquer Syria.
So you're still not ruling that out, such an offensive?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much dependent on the situation on the ground, the balance of forces, what will be the risks, and what... I can see the benefit of controlling it. I can also see the risks in terms of escalation and pushback, not by Haftar necessarily, but the others. The Turks might probably discount the Egyptian threat because Egypt is not a player. But if the Emiratis get involved seriously, and if Russia pushes back, whether through its air force or through various proxies, that will increase the costs and the risk for Turkey. And Turkey won't be able just to delegate the fighting to all kinds of militias and proxy forces, the GNA forces, but also the Syrian mercenaries. Yeah, it might involve actually Turkey doubling down and sending its own ground troops in order to take Syria, which will have all kinds of repercussions also domestically. Because again, when they ratified in the Turkish Grand National Assembly those two deals, there was cross-party support for the maritime delimitation deal, but not for the military support one, which is the price Turkey paid to the GNA. Again, GNA was not super enthusiastic about the maritime deal. It had resisted Turkish overtures for a long time, understandably so, because of fears that it will inflame other players and it will have there'll be a pushback. They ultimately did. They accommodated the Turks. But what they extracted from Turkey was this commitment to have Turkey bailing them out on the military field. But again, this remains controversial. And if body bags start coming back to Turkey, there'll be a lot of people raising the question, why are we in Libya? It might become an issue. In a way that nobody would question, at least from the political mainstream, presence in Syria. I mean, Syria was controversial, but it's a pill that was swallowed under the heading fight against the PKK. Libya might turn into a much more divisive issue if the cost starts mounting. Right now, Turkey is winning and it has become an asset for Erdogan, but who knows about a future.
You mentioned the Syrian mercenaries fighting there. We've seen an uptick in activity in their homeland of late. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and Middle East Monitor reported that at least 5 large Turkish military convoys moved into Idlib province in the past 2 weeks or so, presumably to deter an offensive by Russia and Assad's forces against rebel groups there. Last week, a Russian general was killed in Deir ez-Zor, and there have been clashes recently in northeast Syria involving American, Russian, and Turkish forces. I've also read that Moscow was not happy about the oil deal an American company signed with the Kurdish leadership in northeast Syria early this month. It seems to me like tensions are rising all across northern Syria of late. Should we be concerned?
I guess so. I mean, the situation is not stable after fighting died down in March in Idlib. Speaking about Idlib in particular, not other regions of North Syria.
Where Turkey and Russia brokered a ceasefire in March, yes.
Exactly. But the Turkish policy kind of works because they have built enough military strength and drawn a red line against Assad. And Putin reluctantly engaged as a peacemaker after being reluctant to answer Erdogan's calls. So Turkey showed its muscle and got the outcome it wanted in Idlib. If Assad wants to mount another offensive and conquer other parts of Idlib, he has to face off with the Turkish military next to Turkey's border. So the logistics of this operation are not kind of challenging logistics of the Libyan operation. It's not an expeditionary operation. So what I want to say is that the Syrian military plus its Iranian backers and all kinds of proxy militias are no match for Turkey. It can kind of deal with them. So that leads me to suspect that maybe even if volatile the situation around Idlib can go into a frozen conflict scenario, other parts of northern Syria might follow a different logic. You did mention Deir ez-Zor. We don't know who planted the landmine killing this Russian general. I mean, this is the highest ranking casualty. I might be wrong here, but that's my impression.
From highest ranking Russian casualty in Syria.
Exactly. But that's serious. And of course, the Americans are still there despite Trump's kind of announcement that U.S. is pulling out. In fact, a small contingent remains.
And ending its partnership with the SDF. That hasn't happened either.
Exactly. So much of the fundamentals, except for this buffer zone Turkey managed to set up there, nothing much has changed beyond that, which creates risks of new collisions and new fights for control. And this is, of course, the area where Syria's oil resources are concentrated. So we might expect more volatility there in fighting. I might be wrong on this one, but if I'm to see fighting re-emerging, it will be in the northeast rather than Idlib. And of course, there's the ISIS factor we tend to forget about. The jihadis, but they're regrouping. They're still there in the desert, and they might reemerge as an insurgency and might be the factor pushing the region over the brink.
You said the Turkish policy kind of works. I was thinking in the first years of the war, the Syrian war, Erdogan vowed to get rid of Assad. That has not happened. More recently, he committed to eradicating the Kurdish enclave of Rojava, settling up to 2 million refugees in northeast Syria. He's achieved neither of those things, but Turkey has pushed the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, away from the border and taken control of sizable chunks of Syrian territory, in which there have been a number of allegations of war crimes, I should say. But I wonder, what do you expect Turkey to seek to do with the areas it controls in Idlib and Afrin and further east? Do you expect Ankara to be able to hold on to them long term as a buffer, maybe set up some sort of partition and resettle refugees there? Or do you expect a massive Russia-backed offensive from Assad to retake these areas at some point, or at least Idlib?
Well, what I see right now is this creeping scenario of incorporation into Turkey, because it's not about just putting boots on the ground, but also the Turkish state has ventured in with infrastructure, hospitals, schools. We saw those areas switching to the Turkish lira amidst the meltdown of the Syrian pound. So for all intents and purposes, they're becoming part of Turkey, not unlike northern Cyprus. Of course, a very different case, but still. And other people have looked at South Lebanon and the Israeli occupation. Longer term, it turned into an enclave source. But this one might actually become. I think another analogy, just thinking aloud here, might be what Russia has done with breakaway parts of its former Soviet empire, right? I mean, Abkhazia or South Ossetia or Transnistria and Moldova are those frozen conflicts that actually are part of a Russian, the Russian state, even if de jure they are separate entities and recognized as states. Something along those lines will probably happen. All things being equal, of course, in northern Syria, there'll be the blurring of the border, and those enclaves will become extensions of Turkish sovereignty, also the Turkish welfare state, and so on and so forth. In the long term, if there is a settlement on Syria, certainly Turkey will use them as bargaining chip to assert the outcome it wants. So reincorporation into a new Syria will be conditioned on concession by Assad or somebody else who is heading the regime in the future. So they provide Turkey with diplomatic leverage as well. And the other footnote to this equation is that right now, with the Syrian economy in free fall, with new sanctions slapped by the US, those enclaves might actually work in regime's favor because they're channels of humanitarian aid, trade, also currency for the regime. With the rest of Syria going into free fall, some sort of modicum of economic stability there might actually be good in terms of helping the other parts of Syria. The way Lebanon, before its own economic crisis, has been a source of currency for Syria, this kind of extraterritorial or Turkish-held enclaves might turn into new pieces of the new post-war, post-conflict Syrian economy. But again, this is an issue left to Syrian experts who know on the ground. I think the headline is that the fragile status quo might turn out to be a bit more resilient as the years go by.
Last question before I let you go. We've seen reports in recent weeks that Turkey has cut off the water supply from the Euphrates into Syria, presumably in an effort to squeeze Kurdish people there, and the SDF. Kurdish authorities have warned of a humanitarian disaster. You just talked about Turkey annexing parts of Syria, parts of northern Syria. I wonder if these reports are accurate, if this is maybe a way for Ankara to force people to leave the area and move in.
That could be the case. I'm not sure what the strategic rationale behind Turkey's move are. In general, going back to your question about Turkish goal, of course, the maximalist goals, whether it's toppling Assad or defeating the PKK and its affiliates, is not feasible to achieve. But in the spectrum of goals between just a full defeat and a full victory, there are a lot of shades of gray. And Turkey has done its best to contain the Kurdish nationalist movement in this part and retain enough leverage over the economy, politics, security, in order to apply pressure and be there and be a spoiler on any plans to create this Kurdish autonomy. And it's probably a bit of a similar strategy in the East Mediterranean, going full circle in our conversation. Turkey probably cannot get what it wants 100%, but it has enough power to spoil other parties' plans and force a stalemate, and being the spoiler through military force and partly with legal or legalistic means is what it's after. It is not getting what it wants in Syria or in Eastern Med, but its adversaries and competitors are not getting what they want either. And I think that describes how
It's
the
interesting. So
policy works out.
you might say that despite widespread denunciations of Turkey's aggressions and policies, both in Syria and in the Eastern Mediterranean, that it might not have gotten what it's wanted, Turkey, but it has gained leverage and frustrated its opponents. So to a certain extent, both policies are, to a certain extent, a success.
Right now they are, unless we have a major accident and there is unwanted escalation, which will change the picture dramatically. But as things stand now, it's a qualified success from the Turkish part, at least in the short term. It's not without costs, to be sure, because there is an alliance against Turkey in the Eastern Med, which is kind of coalescing around Greece and Cyprus, with Egypt, with also Israel. Let's remember in the 90s when Turkey and Greece were rivaling over the Aegean. Israel was sort of on the Turkish side, or at least not taking Greece's side aggressively. And now that's not the case for the past 10 years. So Turkey might be successful now, but down the road, the costs might become much more apparent. We shouldn't forget one other aspect. It's not very fashionable now to talk about the EU. It was yesterday's news when Turkey was trying to gain membership. But it's not irrelevant either, given the external economic relations of Turkey and the crucial place EU occupies. The tensions with Greece and now France actually rule out any ambitions to move forward with this agenda of deepening the customs union and helping Turkey improve its economy through further integration, on the assumption that, okay, the accession talks are now, for all intents and purposes, over. They're not moving anywhere. And
it seems like Turkey doesn't any longer care about that.
Exactly. Neither side cares, really. But neither side wants to walk out first. But actually, both sides might want to do something on the side, and the customs union is a perfect example because it's been very beneficial for both Turkey and its Western European counterparts, doing a great amount of business with Turkey. Well, now with those political tensions on the agenda, that kind of rules out any substantive progress on talks to improve the customs union. Up to now, the main concern was that Turkey was not doing the kind of reforms and moving into authoritarian direction, which made the likes of Chancellor Merkel to rule out any concessions via updating the customs union. Now, with security, Greece and also France being in the anti-Turkish camp, the chances become even more slimmer. And that's bad news for Turkey because its economy is not in a great shape. And COVID-19 has taken even greater toll. And that's part of the cost Turkey is going to pay in the following years. Erdogan, of course, to be realistic, calculates that the cost is bearable. It's not the end of the world. He can get away with it. He can muddle through politically and economically. But it's a proposition to be tested, and it will be put to a test.
Only time will tell the impact of this
exactly
anti-Turkey alliance.
Exactly.
Dimitar Bechev of the Atlantic Council, thanks so much for your time and your insights. It's been a pleasure talking to you again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here, for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.